The views expressed in the following show are of the host, the guest, and the callers. The content of the following show, its accuracy, authenticity, and the ramifications of the use or application of said content is the responsibility of those speaking and listening, not the broadcast medium. We are back, and we're going to be talking with, this is an interview I really was looking forward to, Patrick Wood, who is the editor of August Forecast and the August Review. It is a newsletter that I've been actually hooked up to for a while, and I was interested in his work on the Trilateral Commission, and in particularly the work on, and you'll find in his book that is out, Technocracy Rising is the book, and the whole idea of technocracy and what it does. Because as I look out into the world, I see a lot of things going on, and I see a lot of different people coming up with explanations for certain facets of it, and a lot of overlaps and so on. And one of my tenets that I discovered years ago is that in a dualistic type of society, we tend to look at one, two, or three different things. When we'll latch on to the one we're most familiar with, and that becomes the factual, real example. And anything that doesn't fit in there gets discarded. And it goes in science, it goes in sociology, anything. So what I try to do is I want to, the parts that don't fit are the most important parts because they end up gearing you on a better path to fit everything. And so when I watched the video interview of Patrick Wood that was done by John B. Wells, and let me go to John let him talk, which, I think talk show hosts are like guitarists. The good ones know when not to play. And he did a good job interviewing and letting Patrick say his case. So that's why I've been telling people the last few weeks to make sure you watch this video kind of prior to here. I mean, we'll cover some of the ground, but it's a 3-hour interview that goes into all the history, beautifully laid out, and it would be a great primer. Now, there's several other interviews that are out there. I have not seen them, but this is the one I know is good, and I based on it. And what I hope to do from here is to start like using that as a guide and then going off on the questions like I would have asked if I could have. And now I can. So I want to welcome to the show Patrick Wood, author of Technology Rising, and welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. Glad to be with you today.
Yeah, it's not good information that you're bringing, but it is so rewarding it's like an itch. When you get the data that fits it, explains it, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
Now I understand. And of course, when you understand, you can act appropriately and so on. So I appreciate that, and then that interview and how you did it as well. I mean, you literally started from the beginning. And in fact, I'd like to start at the beginning. When you talk about technocracy actually starting out in the 30s and so forth, I was not aware what a popular thing this was. It was a big deal. And then I started to come up with a list of possible technocrats, I guess the word would be, and it really explained a lot of the things going on. So why don't you at least give us a little opening of how this kind of was birthed in the 30s, and we can go from there.
Right. I would say first that there was no institutional money behind technocracy in the 1930s. Now, I say that just to kind of scare off some of the conspiracy theorists that will try and, peg the original technocracy movement on what we're doing today. But they had no money from the Rockefellers. They had no money from the Mellons, from the Carnegies. They basically were just operating on their own. Now, as a movement, they did get some support from Columbia University for a short period of time, and that they were actually headquartered there for a little bit. But when it was discovered that one of the co-founders was pretty much of an intellectual fraud, Columbia University kicked him out, and they went out on their own. And shortly after that, they actually incorporated in New York as a regular incorporation, a membership organization called Technocracy Incorporated. But the backdrop to this was, in the heat of the Depression, a lot of people believed that capitalism was dead. And I try to put myself back there. I think I probably would have believed that myself. There was horrible unemployment. There was hunger. Industries just shut down. The stock market had crashed. Banks had crashed. I mean, who wouldn't have thought that capitalism was dead? Well, scientists and engineers, not all, some, especially around the Columbia University nexus in New York City, the engineers and scientists got together and decided that technology was the culprit in knocking off capitalism. And because technology had come into the world and into society, that the world was behaving differently, and they kind of bought into this idea that capitalism could not exist as it used to exist because of technology coming into society. And so they set about to create a new economic model that would be based on energy rather than on supply and demand and price-based economics, and that everything would be priced in terms of energy, and they wanted to put the whole world in balance. It was a very similar concept to what we have today with sustainable development. And it's no wonder that they're basically cut out of the same bolt of cloth. But they wanted to do this, and they wanted to have a resource-based economy that would run much more efficiently than capitalism would run. It was a utopian system, by the way. Lots of promises, no deliverables. One of the greatest utopian novels ever written in 1932 was written looking into the face of technocracy of that day. And that, of course, is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. If people have read or haven't read, you should go read it. Read Huxley's work, and you'll see that he concluded that where this utopian system would go would be straight to a scientific dictatorship, eventually. Fortunately, they didn't have all the technology to do that back then, but they do now.
And then on that note, with Brave New World, I've often wondered, reading it, and I've read it several times, is this a criticism or a showpiece of this way of doing it? And I haven't personally kind of really got an answer from that.
I can't honestly get an answer either. The Huxley family were complete globalists, completely so. Aldous's brother, Julian, was one of the original founders of UNESCO, for instance. And he was also a very prominent humanist of his day, and was actually the president, or what do we call him, the director of the Humanist Association for years. So they were total globalists. Aldous was more of the fiction writer, if you will. But whether he saw this as a forecast, like this is where we need to go, or whether it scared him a little bit and he thought this is where, if this continues, this is where it is going to go, I don't know. Honestly, I can't say.
And that's where I kind of wonder that where I know you've heard stories about what is his I can't think of it now. I'm getting a blank. It was the I want to say Truth, or gosh, it's that book that was a historical document of the history of the world. Like, honestly,
you're talking about Tragedy and
Hope. I'm thinking Truth and Consequences.
Yeah, there you go. Truth and Consequences. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah.
And when it was like an honest story of it, and it is like, well, you can't say this out in front of the world. Like, did you? Wait a minute. And they ended up kind of getting it off, killing it and all that. But I mean, that's what I wondered. I wonder if this was like, and nobody could come out and say no because I don't know. But anyway.
The science fiction aspect of Brave New World was that the technology truly did not exist then to do what he said, what he wrote about in his book. It was a very futuristic book in that regard, and quite an astute one too. I have to say, the way technology is being used today and the direction it's going in very closely parallels what Huxley wrote about in 1932. But the only reason I mention Technocracy and Brave New World at the same time is that hardly anybody ever in history associated Brave New World with technocracy. But that's because the historical movement of technocracy really never hit the history books. You can't find it in American history books. And the reason is, I found a very simple reason for it. No conspiracy necessarily. Yeah, maybe a little, but I mean, not really. The reason is that the newspaper syndicate of the day was played very unscrupulously by Technocracy Inc. They got really upset after a while when they realized that they had been played and that they had played Columbia University and that all of the, the academic credentials flew out the window. The head of that empire, Randolph Hearst, an egomaniac for sure, sent out a memo to all of his newspapers across the country and said, if you ever mention the word technocracy again, you're fired. You can just give yourself a pink slip, if you mention the word technocracy. And that dropped it out of the history books. I mean, it was just cold turkey. No more technocracy was ever spoken. And so when historians go back to recreate history, where they go to is the newspapers and magazines. And they see what people were writing about, what people were interested in, the events of the day, the current events, the analysis, what others were saying, this sort of thing. And this is how history books typically are written. So when technocracy all of a sudden just had a big void, a big gap, historians look back and figure, nothing to this. Yeah, no interest here. Let's go on another topic. Let's write about FDR and the New Deal or something. They didn't write about technocracy anymore. I found pictures of original technocracy that just blow your mind. This was a big movement. There were over 500,000 card-carrying technocrats in America at one time, and a lot more people following it that didn't join, but they were still part of the movement. And I have a picture of the Hollywood Bowl in the early 1930s, probably 1935 or 6, where the Hollywood Bowl is full of people attending a Technocracy Incorporated meeting. It's astounding. It figures it was in Hollywood, right? The Hollywood crowd in California in general went for technocracy in a big way. But so did Washington, so did Oregon, Washington State, British Columbia, and then from there it kind of swept across the country, actually the continent. Canada was really big on technocracy as well. So the technocracy movement was very significant, and their doctrines were very significant as well. One of the co-founders, a guy by the name of M. King Hubbard, went on to become a rather well-known geophysicist, an oil guy, if you will. And in 1954, this was a guy who invented the peak oil theory, the so-called Hubbard's peak. And peak oil theory plays very prominently today in all the issues of scarcity, especially with energy. It's been proven false at this point in history for a number of reasons. But most of the eco-movement today, the various eco-movements today around the world, will credit M. King Hubbard as being one of the founding fathers, if you will, ideologically, of the ecology movement and sustainable development movement. So here he is, being a co-founder back as a young man back in the 1930s of Technocracy Incorporated. His partner back in those days was a guy by the name of Howard Scott, and Howard Scott was a guy who had no credentials. He basically lied to just about everybody he came in contact with about his, great engineering prowess and whatever, but he didn't have a degree and he didn't have, any real insight into anything. He's a promoter, basically, a wannabe. So it kind of had an interesting beginning. Technocracy was actually outlawed in Canada for 2 years as a subversive organization. They made an association between the Canadian technocracy movement and a comparable movement that was going on in Nazi Germany at the time. And they didn't like that. The government didn't like that at all. They thought, wow, if this has any connection to Nazi Germany, we don't like it. So Technocracy Inc. was shut down for 2 years in Canada.
Yeah, as we were talking here, I was scrolling around and I found the man in the gray suit that from those days with the Technocracy and the Hollywood Bowl, etc.
Yeah, they all wore those gray suits. That was part of the uniform, if you will. The director of operations of Technocracy Inc. was a man by the name of William Knight. He was an aircraft engineer and worked for a subsidiary of a German aircraft company. He was credited as being very pro-Nazi socialism, pro-Hitler, and pro-fascist. And he thought that technocracy should have a more paramilitary look. So he encouraged the leaders to adopt this uniform, if you will, as a gray double-breasted suit. The women had comparable suits, skirts and double-breasted coat and a hat. And they all wore the monad symbol as it was their corporate logo and their moniker. And interesting enough, they even had General Motors talked into creating a special paint for automobiles called Technocracy Gray. And the true technocrats all bought cars from General Motors and had them painted Technocracy Gray. And they put the logo on the side of the monad symbol. It's a red and gray symbol. And they had caravans all over the country with these cars, and they attracted a lot of attention that way. I spoke, just interested, I spoke up in northern Arizona a couple of weeks ago. And a gentleman came up to me and his father, after the program was over. His father was 93 years old, and he was there. He was in great shape. And they came up to me and told me this story. He said, well, until I heard your presentation on technocracy, I had no idea what technocracy really was. But he said back in 46, when this guy's dad was 23 years old, that his father was a member of Technocracy. And they went on a caravan from Phoenix, Arizona to San Francisco. And he said, I was just cleaning out my pictures the other day. I was going through all my life pictures, just bucketfuls of pictures. And he said, I ran across 47 slides of pictures that we had taken from that caravan. He said, would you like them? I said, oh, would I like them? Holy mackerel, it'd be great. And you know what? I just received them yesterday. They sent them to me. And I'm so excited to get them because these are pictures that have never been seen by anybody anywhere before. But they had, in this caravan, 300 cars, all painted Technocracy Gray, everybody wearing their Technocracy uniform, broadcasting megaphones on top of the cars, so they would go through cities and they would have their handset inside, with the amplifier, and they would come to the meeting, tonight at such and such a place. And they'd drive all over towns and stuff and have people, notified that they're going to have a big meeting on technocracy. So it was a significant movement, all to say. Gray was in, all other colors were out. They had a special salute that they used with each other. It wasn't a Heil Hitler, but it was a special technocracy salute. And they all recognized each other. And of course, Howard Scott, the founder of Technocracy, was fearless leader. The I don't know what they call him, the chief or something. So they had a special salute for him.
And so it from our point, you explained it with the newspapers, but from our point, it's like this. There's this movement, things are happening, and did it die, go underground? Did it peter out? Hardcore kept on going on. I mean, what kind of happened after this? If I can call it the golden age period.
Sure. Yeah, they continued on. Actually, the organization is still alive. They have an office right up close to the Canadian border in Washington State. I visited there, talked with some of the old timers that were part of the original movement. They're probably well in their 90s now if they're still alive. But the movement kind of died out as FDR refused to acknowledge technocracy outright and took off with a New Deal. And World War II finally came along, and The economy did start to pick back up again. It didn't look like capitalism was dead after all. And Americans, plus the illusion of Nazi collaboration, kind of the similarity with these gray uniforms and all that stuff. I think that really played against them. And that gave a bad taste to a lot of people, I think, especially patriotic people. When we got in the war, it was into the war, it's like, man, nobody wanted anything to do with the appearance of Germany at all. So technocracy kind of went out of public favor at that point. And the only way they got along in the first place was by donations and stuff. They had a membership fee to join Technocracy Inc. It was not a flush organization with money. They didn't have the Rockefellers behind them. They didn't have any big trust or anything like that behind them. And it stayed on, it lived on at Columbia University in the halls of academia, so to speak. And we see technocracy resurfacing at Columbia University in 1970 when a young political science professor by the name of Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And Brzezinski did not use the word technocratic. He did not use technocracy. He called it the Technotronic Era. But in fact, upon analysis of the book again, reanalysis, I find that he is basically, advancing the original party line of technocracy from the 1930s. And we're fortunate, I have to say, engineers are good about documenting things. You got to hand it to, good disciplined mind. They get out the quadrille paper, they get out the pen, they get out the protractor. They're good at just drawing diagrams and making lists of things. And they did that back in the 1934. They created a book called the Technocracy Study Course. This was the Bible, if you will, of technocracy in those days. It was very specific, very well fleshed out. And they laid out everything that would have to happen in order for technocracy to become a reality. And we have that book with us to this day. I've been through it multiple times with a fine-tooth comb trying to figure out exactly what they were talking about. And it was definitely an economic system, a replacement economic system for capitalism. They were not interested in politicians. They hated politicians by and large. They felt politicians were the ignoramuses that killed capitalism. And so they had no use for politicians whatsoever. And they felt that the scientists and engineers, should just be given control. They should just be in charge and run society the way, that seemed best to them according to their scientific method. It was very egotistical on their part, very egotistical, very paternalistic.
I'm wondering if the idea of science, it reminds me of the dispute that went back with Aristotle and the sophists. It seems like that the scientific method was a way to get out of superstition and emotional ignorance, which we call emotional reaction, and they try to.
Right.
And I think looking back at Aristotle, it kind of sterilized looking at things. We come into a materialistic thing, and it seems like that's kind of like in a governmental sense was the reaction.
It is. The father of technocracy was a French philosopher by the name of Henry de Saint-Simon. I won't pronounce it in the French way because you wouldn't understand it, but it's Henry de Saint-Simon. He lived between 1760 and 1825, and he's acknowledged widely as the father of modern technocracy. He wrote this back then. This was his attitude. Quote, "A scientist, my dear friends, is a man who foresees. It is because science provides the means to predict that it is useful, and scientists are superior to all other men." Close quote. That's an astounding statement by a philosopher who lived, 250 years ago. And of course, you can take exception with that statement. I think I can pretty easily. Does science really have a crystal ball that they can predict the future? I don't think so. They still think they can today. People like Al Gore are certain that he can predict the future about climate warming. And he's letting all of us know it. If you don't go along with his philosophy, you're a denier, And he said a couple of months ago, if you're a denier, you deserve to be punished. It's crazy.
Now, that was very alarming. It was very alarming because the whole tenet of this country is supposed to be for people to have their varying opinions and whatnot and so on.
Yeah, not anymore.
Yeah, and if there was a majority of people who thought that way, who elected people in there, I mean, that's one way, but to simply outlaw it is not the way it's supposed to go.
So then, the second part of this is, are scientists really superior to all other men? I don't think so. I have great respect for science. And I appreciate people that have gone through an education system where they learn the hard sciences. It takes a lot of brain power to do that. But are they better than all other men? I'm sorry. That's what Hitler said about his super race.
Right.
And they were superior to all other men, and therefore all other men deserve to die.
I mean, I grew up in science is my thing, and I thought that science was an unbiased inquiry into finding out evidence and so on. And I learned it isn't. It's a religion, and there's varying people. But it seems to be that this idea here of science solving the problems have created the modeling, and now the answers are found in the modeling rather than in observation and in reality.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So if you can build a model that says, now, of course, the idea is they're building a model to honestly find out the answer, but now it opens up that you can build a model to give an answer that you would like to hear, and then see, look at, and that's how you can talk people into doing it.
Right. The hard sciences, to be fair, the hard sciences like, physics and electronics and, biology, whatever, I have no problem with those hard sciences per se at all, because they're on a quest for discovery. And when they discover something is particularly true, that is true, it gets documented, tested by other scientists and engineers and whatever to validate it. But when you cross metaphysics with science, the metaphysical quest, if you will, for some other higher truth that cannot be proven or demonstrated by the scientific method, then you get into real trouble. See, this is the issue. This is the problem that Henry de St. Simon had, is that he crossed his metaphysical beliefs with science and created a hybrid or a bastardized form of science that we now today would call pseudoscience. It's not a true science. It's not a true hard science. And yet, many hard scientists that are inside that, inside of disciplines like physics, for instance. When a professor of physics or a PhD physics guy crosses what he knows about physics with metaphysical dogma, he goes off the rails pretty quickly and starts dabbling in things that have nothing to do with science at all. Yet he makes it, he masquerades as if it does.
Yeah, see, I might come up with a metaphysical, physical, theological, whatever construct of how I think the universe works, and I might even show evidence to back it up and all that, but it's going to be an opinion.
Right.
But when I decide to make it law that everybody has to agree with me, see, that's the problem. I mean, you can have anything you want. It's just that idea. Before we go, I want to get the Trilateral Commission. Before I go there, I want to just go back to those early days. H.G. Wells, was he a technocrat?
He was looking at technocracy when he wrote 1948. Absolutely. He was not as far as I know, he's not a card-carrying technocrat, to put it that way.
Because when I think of the movie Things to Come, which is based on his book, and he wrote the screenplay,
right?
It kind of gives me that kind of impression from that.
Yes. He was very familiar with technocracy, obviously. I just don't have any particular evidence that he actually joined the organization. But like I said, there was lots of people that didn't join that were big fans. Another person that was huge in the development of technocracy-like things was Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller knew all the people. He boasted that he knew all the technocrats, and he agreed with them, but he wasn't a member. And he was very instrumental in developing lots of things, like the modern smart grid, for instance, and the global smart grid. He was the guy that really architected that whole thing originally. But he wasn't a card-carrying technocrat.
I'm actually fast forwarding, but it's still on the idea of the technocracy. The film series Zeitgeist.
Yes.
The one in particular is called the Addendum. They offer a solution of it, which this is before I was aware of you, the book, even for that matter, technocracy. You know, I mean, it's a word at that point. Right. And I'm looking at it, and of course, now to me, it fits right in with that area. But the flaw that I found in it was, as much as it sounded nice, you had robots making everything, you had the green power grid, everyone had free to find their own, create their own thing. I mean, that sounds great, except it's like, but now no one knows how to actually do anything on their own, and so now you have this elite of people. I think they said it was like 5%. Are take care of things. Well, they're now really even more the kings because people are now completely unable on their own without the system to do it.
That's right. The system tells them what to do. And the whole Zeitgeist movement, by the way, they hate to be called technocrats. I've had a few bouts, if you will, with them over the last few years. They don't like to be associated with technocracy, but I think they really don't know what historic technocracy was. Most of them, at least the rank and file members of Zeitgeist. Peter Joseph does, though. He had his eyes wide open. But Zeitgeist is a complete knockoff of technocracy. I mean, complete. It's just that it's, fast forward 60 years, and they've got more technology and more science behind them now to kind of make it more science fiction-like. It's the same thing. It's the same exact dogma, a resource-based economic system where the government basically tells you everything to do. And society is managed by engineers and scientists who know better. And after all, if it's science, how can you argue with it? Science says you should cut your hair differently because you live longer or you live shorter or whatever.
I was thinking of that when you had said that in the other interview. Science says. I thought it as Simon says.
Yes, yes. I think of the joke that's kind of taken off the. I don't know if it was off the Mayan civilization or whatever, but where you have these skits, where these movies were made. I can think of a couple of movies that were made with this, where the young version is taken up to the top of a volcano to be thrown in as a sacrifice, because the god of the volcano demands sacrifices. Well, what a completely stupid proposition that volcanoes can speak. That there's a god of a volcano or something that can speak to humans to tell them what to do or else. But see, it's the priesthood that really set that up. The priesthood conned the people into thinking that the volcano had something to say, and if you didn't do what the volcano said, why it's going to spew ashes and fire all over you and kill you all. And so the priest would go up to the mountain very carefully. He'd approach the volcano. He would listen, very carefully, just to hear the faint voice of the volcano speaking. Next month, 2 young virgins, blondes, please. And, they'd come down the hill and say, oh, you won't believe what I heard. Oh, the volcano said, you people out there, next month, 2 blonde virgins, or else the volcano is going to blow and it's going to wipe your village off the face of the planet. And the priest had exercised incredible control, godlike control, if you will, over the people. He could make them do anything he decided to do. You see, and this is kind of the same paradigm we have today with science. These people that are telling us what to do because science says, they haven't heard anything from science. I'm sorry, I don't want to be, I don't want to totally offend people here, but the data behind climate warming has been proven to be fraudulent, I don't know, 12 times over. They haven't heard anything. They're using computer models that even they don't understand. And they're making these predictions as if they heard it from the volcano itself. They heard it from science itself. Like, did science ring the phone and you pick up the thing and some artificial intelligence said, I figured this all out and this is what you need to do. See, they haven't heard anything. But they've decided what they want you to think they heard. And so they can lord it over you.
It seems like the media now is working for technocracy, let's say, as opposed to against it. No.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, my gosh, yes. They are. The media will parrot anything today that has to do with technocracy. And and we should relate this in modern terms to modern movements now. The things that model technocracy today are things like sustainable development, Agenda 21, smart grid, that's the smart meters on the side of homes and businesses, common core education standards, smart growth, land use policies, central planning, councils of governments, which are all over our nation today, unfortunately, public-private partnerships. These type of things came from technocracy. It's a package deal. These are not separate, independent movements or, just things that kind of happen at random because somebody didn't have their hand on the rudder or something. All of these things taken together as a package represent historic technocracy applied in the modern era. They're all related. And this was the big revelation that just put me over the top on this. When I started connecting these things together, I said, "Holy mackerel! This is bigger. This is bigger than anything we could have ever thought or dreamed before." Because truly, it's like these things are so different sometimes. You say, "Well, how could they possibly be related?" We're just you almost want to think, "Well, we're just having a streak of bad luck in our country." That all these things could hit at the same time. But it wasn't bad luck.
As we're getting ready to leave the old days, how does Ayn Rand fit into this technocracy type thing?
Ayn Rand certainly knew of technocracy because that was her era. She had to be exposed to it. And based on my own association with Ayn Rand and her work, all the Atlas Shrugged and so on from her era, when I was in my 20s, I was a follower, if you will, an objectivist. And I studied all of her works very, very thoroughly. So I didn't study them with technocracy in mind, but looking back now, knowing and I've left that behind a long time ago, but looking back about what I remember about Ayn Rand and objectivism and what I know about technocracy, on one hand, I would say there was no connection whatsoever. On the other hand, as far as let me back up a second. Objectivism basically put the burden of freedom on individuals. That's the opposite of technocracy. Technocracy wants to take freedom from individuals and tell them what to do. So Rand wrote against people that were, government bureaucrats that were telling people what to do and telling companies how to run their business and putting regulations on them to prevent them from running business the way they wanted to make money. So on balance, I would say that Rand would have not been in favor for technocracy as it was presented back then.
Yeah, I think that the difference between a technocracy could actually limit someone who would be free to pursue their passions in a Randian type situation. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, the problem I had with Atlas Shrugs was it sounds nice, except when you think about it, if I have an idea about how to make a widget, I have an actual right to the resources on this planet to make that happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm more of that the planet belongs to like the people, and if I want to take copper out of the ground, then the people will have to somehow profit from me taking the copper from the ground. Mm-hmm. But it seems that when I go to buy a copper mine, I'm paying like a government for it, and the people get nothing. Possibly jobs out of it and so on. So yeah. Okay, well, let's probably kind of leap forward into the Trilateral Commission because that ends up being today's manifestation of a technocracy, and it's when you start tabulating all the things you've talked about. When I was going through it, it's like, wow, it is hammered down right down with it with today. So
yeah.
So the CFR started with, you mentioned Brzezinski and also Rockefeller.
Well, the Trilateral Commission was.
I mean, when I say Trilateral Commission, I'm going to end up probably saying that a few times. So,
yeah. Okay.
So let's go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, the Trilateral Commission was first proposed in 1972 at a Bilderberg meeting in Europe, where both Brzezinski and David Rockefeller attended. Brzezinski was a guest of David Rockefeller. They had already discussed forming the Trilateral Commission, but they wanted to get some peer review, if you will. So they went to the Bilderberg meeting, and they talked to people over there about it, and they got enough encouragement to say, hey, that's a great idea, go do that. But they came back and they did it. In 1973, they formed the Trilateral Commission, and they drew its first round of membership from North America, Japan, and from Europe. There were only about 200 members initially, a little over 200 maybe, but about 76 were from the United States, some were from Canada, a third were from Japan, a third from Europe. And this was the first international action-oriented group that I can identify historically. There's never been anything quite like it before. And their express purpose, and their writings were very clear about this, they wanted to create a new international economic order. Those are the words they used, new international economic order. They also wanted to foster interdependence. That was a word that they really popularized back then. I don't believe there was any call for interdependence from the public domain, if you will. But they said, oh, no, the world is interdependent now, and we need to accommodate that. And so with those two ideologies in mind, interdependence and a new international economic order, they set out to reshape the global economic system. And when Antony Sutton and I studied this back in the late 1970s, we did not really understand what new meant. We thought, well, it's new in the sense that they're going to reprogram the slot machine, so to speak, to always pay them when they pull a handle. But when you pull a handle, you're going to get sawdust and buffalo chips, right? Sure. And we were accurate in as much as we knew, because they did, in fact, rig the economic system to pay them repeatedly, while other countries and other companies got hosed. That's all history now. But fast forward 40 years and then kind of sift back through the historical record, I see very clearly that what they meant by new was technocracy. It wasn't just a revamping of the capitalistic system of the free enterprise, but it was to implement a brand new economic system that the world had never seen before. And that's the system of technocracy. Now, they didn't exactly call it technocracy, but I believe in pinning the tail on the donkey where it belongs. That's not the Democrat donkey, by the way. It's just the donkey. We'll call a spade. And I theorized this for several years, but I got a little help in February of this year, 2015, when the head of climate change at the United Nations, a lady by the name of Christiana Figueres, did a press conference in Europe. And at that press conference, she verbalized the following. This is astounding. I'll read it slowly, and you can listen to it. She said, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution," close quote. Now, that's profound, absolutely profound, because climate change is part of technocracy, number one. That was, they're using this to drive this new green economy, they call it. And here she says very pointedly that the goal and the timeline is to destroy capitalism altogether. This is exactly what technocracy wanted to do in the 1930s. This is exactly what Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development, all the other things I mentioned before, as a package are designed to do. They're preparing for a technocracy economic system to completely supplant capitalism and free enterprise. If they pull this off, the world will not see the glimmer of freedom and liberty again, probably for 500 plus years.
Not to get sidetracked in the ideology here, I when they say energy-based economy, I look at money as a form of exchangeable energy. For example, I build a widget, you pay me for the widget, I give you the widget, you're buying the energy it took to build the resources, the so forth. What's it different with that model? What makes this energy-based economy different from like how I just described it?
Well, what you say is true up to a point, because let's say you're a person power, like there's horsepower, right? What is, one horse moving a 200-pound weight or something 100 yards, I don't know, whatever, but there's some definition of horsepower. And then you think, well, what about manpower? Yeah, well, one person can do, X amount of shoveling in a day or whatever it is. But you have to factor in creativity. You have to factor in other things that give you value, make you perhaps more valuable or less valuable than somebody else. And if you make up something that, for instance, can save a bunch of lives and people are willing to pay you a bunch of money for it, well, you're going to get a lot of money beyond just the energy that you personally expend into making that thing.
Okay. So,
and this is the way it's always been. In the end of it, yes, it is your energy and your passion that you put into it. But there's all kinds of other factors that take free enterprise beyond just the energy that you put into it. It is a store of value, however. When you get money, it is a store of your worth and your value, whatever. And so when you retire later on, if you've been putting money aside, why, you can retire in comfort and you're not expending any energy at all. So you're using that today's energy in the future. But here's the thing about an energy-based or resource-based system. You have a shirt on right now that theoretically I could compute exactly how much energy went in to make that shirt. Now, if that's a designer shirt, that might cost me $100 if I went to, Dillard's or Macy's or something. If I went to the discount store and I bought a knockoff, well, maybe I could buy it for $5. What makes the difference? Well, really, the two shirts don't have any difference if you figure out the energy it took to make them. You got diesel for the farmer, you've got transportation, you've got the mills that are running and cranking out the thread, and so on and so on. Well, technocracy would presume to price everything in terms of the energy that it went into it. No supply and demand, just the actual price of energy, or the amount of energy that's in it. You would be given, much in the concept of food stamps, you would be allocated a portion of the energy to be generated by the power plants, et cetera, in society, in the society that you're in. And everybody in society would get their allocation like every month, for instance. And they go to the store to buy things, food, clothes, deodorant, whatever, just the stuff of life. And they would pay a price with energy script that would be a price determined by the technocrats of the energy that went in to make what you're buying. There's no supply and demand here. It's just simply looking at the energy, it's analyzing the energy that went into it. This is completely otherworldly to the whole concept of free enterprise for a number of reasons. Number one, they said if your energy scripts aren't spent during the period of time that they allocate them, they will expire. Mm-hmm. So there's no way for you to save money. You can't save your scripts over.
This is actual.
Yes.
This is not theoretically what they could do. This is actually proposed.
Yes, this is exactly what was written in 1934 in Technocracy Study Course. Okay. And this is exactly where we see the whole world moving right now based around energy. If you study the smart grid initiative and the global smart grid enough, you'll get the idea real quickly that they're trying to balance the production against the consumption of energy. That's the whole thing. That's the whole point. Balanced load. They want to produce a balanced load of energy.
So if I was, Rockefeller, and my income is a certain amount of energy, I would presume because of the companies I have and all this stuff I have, I would get a very large energy allocation, but then he would have to turn around and spend it right away, and he couldn't save it. I don't see how any of the oligarchs would be for this.
This puzzled me for a time as well. I grew up on a farm in Northern California. My attitude is a little bit different than most city people, for sure, but wealth really, we think of wealth today in terms of how much cash do you have? You know, well, are you a billionaire? Oh, billionaire means you have $1 billion, maybe in the bank or stocks or whatever. But those are all paper assets. I'll tell you what, paper assets can be burned up just as fast as you make them. And many people have seen that. But true wealth, historically speaking, true wealth has always been associated with the ground, with the land, with the resources in the land. Are you a farmer rancher? Do you have, cattle on, 25,000 acres? Do you have camels? Do you have gold mine? Whatever. The ground produces every bit of wealth that the world has.
I mean, even gold is from the ground.
Even gold is from the ground. And this has always historically been the measure of a person's wealth, not just cash wealth, but true wealth. How much land do you own that has resources in that land? Now, if it's a barren desert and there's just nothing out there, then your land isn't worth much. But if it's in a place where there's forests and there's gold mines and there's oil and whatever, it's worth a lot. Now, here's the deal. All around the world today, you see countries embarked on a land grab to lock up the land in trust. People say, well, that's preposterous. Well, listen, look at what's happened in the United States alone. The Constitution provides zero support for our federal government owning land. And yet, the Bureau of Land Management, in some cases, in some states in the West, owns as much as 75% of the land mass of individual states. They own it. The federal government owns it. It's taken out of the tax rolls of the local state and is put into the federal trust. Okay? Well, then the roads are shut off so that you can't go in anymore, on your ATV, or you want to go hunting or whatever. No, you can't do that anymore. So they're locking it up, saving it, they say, for future generations. Okay, there's something real. I mean, people don't smell a rat here, but they should. Well, if you understand technocracy, you understand it perfectly. The resource land of the world is being put into a gigantic trust that will be run and administered by trustees, taken away from you because they believe you're not capable of acting responsibly with public assets. You won't do the right thing, in other words, for the public good. They can't trust you. That's what they say. So better that you give up your land and your rights to this global public trust, if you will, and let people who really understand land use policies and stuff, to manage that land on your behalf. Well, you can trust them, because they're all PhDs and they're all scientists and engineers, and, they understand how society should operate and run. So don't worry about it if they own all the land. In the end of this is where this is going. Technocracy will deliver the massive amounts of land, real estate from various countries around the world into this global public trust run by trustees. Nobody's nominated the trustees yet, but I can guarantee you where they're going to come from and who they're going to be. They're going to be the people that sit at the top. They will be the ones that tell you, like you said, well, what if I want to mine some copper? You're welcome to make an application to the global trustees. Say, well, I live out here in so-and-so, and all I want is 100 pounds a month of copper. Can I go out and mine copper on that land? And they'll review your application and say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. But you see, if you're a big mining company, one of their global buddies, their cronies,
right,
they can come in and do anything they want to do. But you, 100 pounds, get lost. Application denied.
Well, I imagine then the trustees would be compensated for their work. And I'm wondering how would they still get paid in the same energy type deal, which they have to turn around and spend?
They might in an unlimited sense because they have control over all the resources in the world. That's the goal here, is to get resources under their control.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have whoever controls the resources, that's where the true wealth lies.
So it sounds to me that, given that is the end goal, then this whole idea of the sustainability and all this stuff is just lip service.
Can I use the word sham?
Because one of the questions I had in here is to try and find out, because a lot of times things start honestly, and there's a good point behind it. Maybe there's a flaw, but nonetheless, it's a good deal. And then somewhere along the line, some shark guy comes along and goes, you know what, I could use this for my own benefit, and takes it over. I mean, you can look at anything from religion to look at economic systems, anything, companies for that matter. It's all, you can start out making the best widget. I came from a company I worked for 20 years that made some of the finest chocolate and candy in Chicago, Fannie Mae Candies. They were bought out by a corporation, and they just drove it into the ground and sold off the assets, So I could see so this is where I'm at. Look at the Trilateral Commission. Did the Trilateral Commission, we didn't really get a lot into it, we'll get back to it, but did they have a goal of world domination, or what do you want to call it, world asset domination, and they using technocracy, or even then, was it still a good idea? And then somebody, or are they, I'm trying to figure that out. Not that it really makes a lot of difference, I guess, but,
Personally, I never thought that technocracy was a good idea. I think it was flawed and failed from the get-go. And who on earth, anyway, believes truly that Zionists are superior to all other men? That's a bad place to start any utopian system. Because what does that say about the rest of us? It means, well, you're inferior. This is nothing of the principles that are embedded in our Constitution, which guarantees us, certain unalienable rights. Well, actually, those are guaranteed by God, but they're supposed to be protected by government. We're supposed to be free to pursue our own dreams, our own passions.
Which also includes, wars and
property.
Includes wars and murder, and
yes, well,
that all comes along with it.
It comes along with it.
Yeah.
And but society to regulate society according to law is preferable to regulating society according to man. Because if man runs society, then society is basically captive to the whim of that man or those men. That's just not, you don't want to, this is what the founding fathers really understood. You don't do that. You create laws and let the laws regulate society. If you kill somebody, you're going to pay the price, period. It's not, it recognizes, okay, people will kill each other, but if you kill somebody, you're going to pay for it. If you steal somebody's property, you're going to get busted and thrown in jail. You can't do that. That's their property, not yours. Well, the government doesn't have a problem with that, though, do they? They can take your property by any number of means legally, and there's no repercussion. Technocracy wants to take everything away from the people, 100%, and basically just tell you that you're going to be happy living on your little, 500 square foot apartment or whatever, or 300 square foot apartment, where you can go out and jog in the park, and you're going to have all the, food and everything, whatever else you want for leisure time. You can read all the books you want. It's like, excuse me, this isn't what we signed up for in this country. We've never had this public discussion at all, that this should be the way the future is going to be. This isn't the future I want. And I haven't talked to any American, honestly, as the future they want.
No, I'm not saying these are good. I'm trying to find out because when I look at capitalism, for example, the ideal of it is that people can have an idea or whatever, and they can grow it and do it. You have the freedom to do it. You work with other people. You create a product. People like the product. I mean, it's good. Except at some point when you have people who are pushing other people out of business, we're gonna have our stuff made over in China. where their wages are less, so we can, knock out our competitor here. I mean, this is when capitalism fails as well. So, I mean, there's no ism that really works without having the right principles behind it.
It does. And I want to say that the reason capitalism has failed America in the last 40 years is specifically because of policies implemented by the Trilateral Commission and its members. These are the people that have ruined our economy. And, some people would say, well, is this on purpose? Or, why would they want to shoot their own toes off? Some of them live here. But the fact of the matter is, if they're driving the whole thing, the whole world towards technocracy, then, of course, they have to kill off the greatest driver of capitalism and free enterprise. That was America, has been America for the last 250 years. And so the policies to open up China, for instance, were purely a Trilateral Commission hatched plan. They were the ones that did it. It was Henry Kissinger first went to China when he was working for Nixon. It was a totally illegal trip, by the way, because China was still an illegal enemy, a communist dictatorship that was a sworn enemy of the United States. It was an illegal trip he took. Then Zbigniew Brzezinski, another member of the Trilateral Commission in Carter's administration, completely opened up and normalized relations with China. And everything after that, all the original companies that rushed into China to build their infrastructure, guess what? 80% of, well, I don't know, I can't give you a percentage, but the vast majority of them were companies who had directors who were members of the Trilateral Commission. They were the ones that filled the vacuum. They were the ones that put the money into China. They were the ones that engineered the reduction of trade tariffs that would allow businesses in America to migrate wholesale to China, killing off the American experiment. And we've lost, in some cases we've lost whole industries.
Yeah, try to find some electronic. I mean, they're there, but they're
very few.
Yeah.
But, we lost the textile industry. We lost the footwear industry. We've lost much of almost probably 80% of the electronic manufacturing industry. You could just go on down the line. Engines, cars, car parts, all the stuff we used to make ourselves. And the evidence of wealth going out of our country is every month that we have a trade deficit. People say, well, you don't worry about trade deficit. We're still doing good. No, every time you have a trade deficit, you're getting wealth. Wealth is being sucked out of your nation. Sucked out. It's wealth that will not return unless somehow you could balance the flow and get a net surplus rather than a deficit of trade in your country. But they set up this condition. By dismantling the trade barriers in America, they set up the condition that the wealth in America would be systematically looted to these other countries. So from their point of view, opening up China made perfect sense. Let's go set up another profit center, and let's let the tide flow from the United States to us, and we'll go over there and we'll make all this buku bucks.
Now, China, you would think, is doing great, but they're having trouble because of their pretty much synthetic. The way they make things is not natural. They're really under. But as I look at the Trilateral Commission on the sheet here, it says North America, Western Europe, and Japan. So it sounds to me like China's being played by the Trilateral Commission as well.
They absolutely are. And China, not surprisingly, is very appropriately called a technocracy today. They don't have any. They're still not quite to the stage where they have energy credits and stuff, but they're being operated by scientists and engineers who think they can run society according to the scientific method. There's a great article in Time magazine in 2002, I believe it was, called "Revenge of the Nerds," that nailed this topic completely and said China is now a technocracy, and they did it in the correct context as well of historic technocracy. But the evidence, the anecdotal evidence that China is a technocracy is go to your search engine and type in China ghost cities, GHOST, ghost cities, and you will see pictures of entire cities that have been built in China, completely engineered from the ground up, skyscrapers, streets, stoplights, septic systems, fiber optic cables. I mean, there's complete cities in every way you can imagine: parks, recreation, offices, office buildings. And yet, these cities are empty. Nobody came. They built these cities, engineered them. All of the industrial activity that went to build those cities got credited towards China's amazing economic growth. And then you go and you look at these cities that are empty and you say, wait a minute, how can you count an empty city towards economic growth? Something's fishy here.
I saw that. I saw some documentaries on that. It is, even I'm scrolling right now pictures along the way here, but even this can't do justice until you're actually on the ground in these cities where you have these skyscrapers of nothing. Yes. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yes. This is an expression of technocracy. You see, these egomaniacs think that just because they build it, people will come. Wasn't there a movie on that or something? If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, Kevin Costner.
I know.
Feel the dream.
You know, they had this wild idea that if they build these cities, that people are just going to show up, and they haven't showed up, and now they're falling apart. The cities are just sitting there, deteriorating.
Well, one of the reasons that I saw in these documentaries was that no one can afford it. You know, there's no work there because there's nobody there, and then how are you going to pay for them? The cost of them were out of the range by far of the economic model that they're working under.
Of course, peasants have no money. They just can't do it. You're right. But they didn't take that into consideration, you see. They're just like, well, we sure have a lot of citizens in our country. They'll all come if we build this brand new cities. And nobody ever... See, they're not economists. They're technocrats. Technocrats don't think like economists.
Oh, I see.
They don't worry about demand. I mean, if you were building a city or a development, let's say you're building a development, housing development, you'd go out and survey your lot, your plot, whatever, and you'd figure out how much money you had to put into it. Probably even before you did all that, you're going to ask the question, is there any demand for the houses I want to build? And if you can't find a market for them, you go, nah, I'm going to pass on that one.
Maybe they should have played the game.
Technocrat doesn't have that problem. Technocrat says, "Oh man, I've got this idea for a housing development. Oh, knock your socks off! It's going to be the best, most efficient housing development you ever saw in your life." And he rushes out to build it with no concern whatsoever whether there's going to be any demand for people who actually want to come and buy it.
Well, maybe they should have played the video game Sim City. You know, that might have given. That sounds like it's got more brains in that game than it does in.
I know. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So when you have looking at the Trilateral Commission, and it seems to be a Western a way of kind of taking over. What about like Rothschilds? How do they fit into it? I mean, we already heard about the Rockefeller. He's one of the guys who started it. But are all these people on board with this?
There's plenty of evidence that the Trilateral Commission has had any number of globalist cronies that are working, even though they haven't been a member of the Trilateral Commission, that are working in complete sync with them. That would include the mucky mucks at the United Nations. It would include a lot of people in some of these other elite organizations like the Atlantic Council, the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg Group, and any other number of the World Economic Forum. Any of these large organizations, you're going to find cronies that are completely in sync. Now, you have to differentiate between wannabes and the real deal. There's a lot of trickle down from these people, you understand. So there's a lot of wannabes down at the lower level that aren't really principal players. They're just going along with the flow because they're making money. They found a way to make a living, a better living than hitching their hitching their train to some other star. So, but the movers and shakers, you find at the top of these organizations, whether it would be the Bank for International Settlements, whether it be the Rothschilds, whether it be the Bilderberg Group or any of these other big highfalutin economic groups that meet. But the Trilateral Commission was the chosen action plan. They're the action organization that's pulled this off. And they've had plenty of other operatives and stuff that weren't members around the world that did their bidding, if you will, to implement policies. But maybe we could look at them in terms of they're the strategists if nothing else, of the system.
How does one of the things that I've dealt with on this show over the years, and listening for years before that, is people are trying to find out who's like running the world, who's got control, and so forth. And there's a lot of people or groups that have been, it's all their fault. They're running it, and so forth. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned you have commonly, I say, the Jews, or specifically Zionists. You have Catholic. You have that, which would be like the Jesuits. You have all these people who are got an agenda to, whatever, destroy the world, rule the world, and so forth. How do all these people line up when you put it in this world? I mean, it looks to me like the Trilateral Commission seems to be the people with the feet on the ground. They got a plan, and it's in action. But how do they fit in with all these other players to come up with this kind of a flow chart of things?
They don't. They don't fit in with all these other groups. I honestly wondered if if they themselves don't use these other groups as flack, if you will, just to confuse everybody and keep everybody away from looking at them. And so the anti-Semitic movement, for instance, is I think is a great example. Everything's Jews' fault. It's all Zionist, And once somebody kind of buys into that thought, they can't think straight until they get rid of that thought. They're focused on one thing. They got blinders on. They can't see outside of that. And it neutralizes them. It makes them ineffective to see anything else that might be actually at play. And you could multiply, you could say, well, it's the same thing with the Jesuits. People that are just sure the Jesuits and the Freemasons are behind everything, they get blinders on and they can't see the real enemy. And, you just wonder if the people at the top understanding how to, confuse everybody with disinformation and misinformation, you just wonder if they're not at least smiling at these groups, if not helping them, get along with these ideas.
Well, yeah, but I guess I would say rather than blind spot, I would say that when you already concluded the ending, then all the evidence gets herded into that or ruled out.
It does.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that's how I would define the blind spot.
Yeah.
And then if you were doing all these things, you want to throw all these people a bone here and there so that it keeps their fire burning, and it keeps you out of the crosshairs.
That's right.
Because if you take those groups, and if you look in the Trilateral Commission, you're going to have Jews, you're going to have Catholics, you're going to have anybody's.
You've got Christian Scientists, you've got Buddhists, you've got atheists, you've got agnostics. I mean, you got every possible mix of religious flavor. If there is a religion running through the likes of the Trilateral Commission, it's none of those. Rather, it's humanism. If there's one religion that I can pick that I've seen over the last 40 years that's common to everything, it is humanism. And part of the early evidence we had of that was the Trilateral Commission's support and domination of an organization known as the Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute changed its name 30 years ago. Maybe more than that. But originally, the Aspen Institute was known as the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies. And even to this day, the Aspen Institute has a preponderance of Trilateral Commission members in the board of directors that use the Aspen Institute as a training platform to train corporate executives all over the world on advanced business practices and policies. They're like an education arm for the corporate world globally. And they've had tremendous influence. They've cycled through tens of thousands of executives, like CEOs and vice VPs and the like, directors and so on. But would I say this is a humanist conspiracy? No, I wouldn't. Because it's just not appropriate to say that. They understand the value of a religious flavor burning through this whole thing. But this is not about religion. It's about economics. They said that from the get-go. So they haven't taken over the churches per se. They've taken over the economic institutions. And they realize that religion is something that they need in order to support the rest of society to keep it going in the direction they want it to go. The worst thing that could ever happen to them is if they have a religious rebellion against them. That would be the worst.
I'm looking at this. The Aspirin Institute is largely funded by foundations such as Carnegie, Rockefeller, Gates, Lumina, Ford. Yeah. You know, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when you say humanism or humanistic, one might read into that, well, to value human life, the human experience, to people to grow and find, you know, all that stuff. But it sounds to me like it is the ego that is looking to see how I can get this human body to do what I want it to do, live forever, have wealth, be able to fulfill my desires or what have you. That, I don't know how I would put that in a more concise way, but that's probably what it really is.
It is. It's the measure that all things, the end of all things, is the measure of man. You know, it excludes any concept of a God. In that sense, it is root, is atheistic. But on the other hand, it includes, you know, you can wrap in any other religion you want to it. So the interfaith movement has a huge impact on, you know, bringing everything together. Let me read you what the World Council of Churches recently wrote. This is actually, it was in 2014. But there was a big summit last year called the Interfaith Summit on Climate Change, right? That's a mouthful. The Interfaith Summit on Climate Change. And this is what the World Council of Churches said in a press release after the conference was over. Now, you understand the World Council of Churches has all of the biggies. It's got the Catholics, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Church of God, the Church of Christ. You know, all the big denominations are part of the World Council of Churches. This is what they said. This is a direct quote from their own publication. Quote, "There has never been such a large amount of religious environmental activity in one location in the history of the world. This week will mark a watershed in the history of religion. It will be the time that people remember as the time when the world's faiths declared themselves irrevocably as green faiths," close quote. Isn't it astounding? The religions of the world have been co-opted by these people to go along with their plan of climate change and, you know, sustainable development and green anything. And even the Pope just a couple of months ago said that he's going to produce a major encyclical on climate change in June of this year in preparation for the big shindig going on at the United Nations in November of this year, the Global Initiative on Climate Change again and Sustainable Development. So the Pope is now completely on board with this, and he's, you know, an encyclical is not, that is not church law. If he were to issue a papal bull, that would be considered as hearing from God. An encyclical is an opinion type thing, but it goes out to all the bishops in the world, who in turn are going to take it to all the parishes in the world. And the pressure is on at that point. You know, who's going to say no? Well, hey, the Pope, man, the Pope's talking about it. Must be good. You know, we better go along with it. See, the way I read this is they cannot risk a religious insurrection. You follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If any one of these church groups were to somehow figure that what they're doing with their green agenda was against their faith, they would rebel, and you can't afford to have a rebellion of, you know, 1 billion people if you're going to have a global movement like this. And so it's not surprising either that one of the main components of the Interfaith Summit on Climate Change also include representatives from the Islamic world as well.
Yeah, they want to get, everybody's going to be dealt in on this wannabe in the leadership of it. I just saw when I'm looking through here, 17, let's see, I think I can show this. Yeah, 17 Anglican bishops from all 6 continents have called for urgent prayer and action on the unprecedented climate crisis, but the actual title of it is the world of a call for urgent action for climate justice. Yeah. That's a scary word when you're going to put that in there.
Climate justice. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I mean, if there's any kind of climate, if you want to look at the world as far as in a pollution sense, climate justice should be coming down on BP for their, 100 days or whatever it was of that. That's the kind of thing. Yeah. But instead, they're talking about basically going to be limiting the poorest sections. Middle and poor are the bulk of it. So if they can control them, that'll do in their concepts. That'll take care of it.
Yes, yes. In the technocrat's mind, you remember the lady Christiana Figueres that I made that quote from at the beginning of our program here that wants to kill off capitalism? This same woman, about a year earlier, suggested that the perfect model for implementing sustainable development is China. She said that, point blank, China. You have to think about that for a minute to see what is she saying, because China has the worst record of pollution of any planet on any country in our planet. Mm-hmm. It's so bad in some cities like Beijing. Sometimes it's so bad that everybody wears these white masks and stuff, and if they can, they don't go outside at all.
Remember the Olympics over there? The Olympics where sometimes they show the cameras and they couldn't even see hardly.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible pollution. And yet this woman believes that the best model for fighting climate change and implementing sustainable development is communist China. Actually, that's a misnomer. We shouldn't call it communist China because it's been morphed into a technocracy. Maybe we should call it Technocracy China. Mm. But that would be a scary thing because it is still totalitarian, and they're completely screwed up, completely repressive.
So these people I actually want to get into. I mean, you went into detail with John B. Wells. So again, people hopefully are going to be watching that.
Yes.
But one of the things that really drove it home that these are the people to watch was the percentage of these people in government.
Yes.
Versus, it's like it's phenomenal. And you would maybe just run through a little bit of that.
Boy, it is phenomenal. Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale were the first dual presidents that were a president-vice president team that were both members of the Trilateral Commission. A third of Carter's a third of the U.S. membership was eventually in Carter's administration, mostly in the cabinet level positions, but also in the State Department. At one time, there was only one member of Carter's cabinet that was not a member of the Trilateral Commission. And then you have, beyond that, George Bush came along with Ronald Reagan after that. Then you had George Bush, he's a member of the commission, George Bush for 4 years. Then you had Clinton and Gore. Both of them were members of the Trilateral Commission. Then you had Bush and Cheney. Cheney was a member, Bush was not. And with Obama and Biden, neither one are members, but they're surrounded by members of the Trilateral Commission. I mean, they're really surrounded by them. They can't move left or right without bumping into these guys. So what they've done, how they've engineered this new economic order over the years. Jimmy Carter created the position of U.S. Trade Representative in 1977. It's one of the first things he did. And the U.S. trade representatives have been the guys that have negotiated these trade treaties, like NAFTA, CAFTA, and others, the Trans-Pacific Partnership right now. Out of those 12 positions that have been appointed by our president, 9 of them have been members of the Trilateral Commission. 9 out of 12. Inconceivable. The current USTR is Michael Froman. He's a member, and he's negotiating not only the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but also the Transatlantic Investment Partnership as well. And so you just have to ask the question, are these people negotiating for you and me as American citizens, for the American economy, or are they negotiating for their own pecuniary self-interest? I think the evidence just tells you the answer to that. I don't need to answer it. Then you have the World Bank. The World Bank and the International Monetary System, the World Bank and the IMF are the two drivers of globalization for the last 40 years. No economist disputes that. Europe gets to a point, the president of the IMF. But our president appoints the president of the World Bank. That's just the way tradition has been since the system was set up. There have been 8 members of the 8 presidents since 1968, which would include 1973, of course. Only 8 presidents of the World Bank. 6 of those have been members of the Trilateral Commission. 6 out of 8. That's incredible. Now, were they executing policies using the World Bank as a platform? Were they executing policies that were any way, shape, or form good for us or for the Western world at large? Or were they negotiating a globalization that would be their flavor and their idea of globalization? And again, I think that's a rhetorical question. It's just inconceivable. Then you have the position of National Security Advisor. This is another interesting one because the NSA is the man, that's the gate or woman, that's a gatekeeper to the president. They're supposed to be the one that approaches the president with intelligence. And so people come to the NSA, whether it be the director of the CIA or whether, NSA or Homeland Security, whatever, they come and give their information to the NSA takes it to the president. And I'm sure there's overlap on that. I'm sure the president can have meetings with anybody he wants. But there's been 17 members of 17 people have occupied the NSA position since 1973. Henry Kissinger was the first. Then came Brent Scowcroft. They were both members. Then came Zbigniew Brzezinski with Jimmy Carter. 10 out of 17 of the NSAs over the last 40 years have been members of the Trilateral Commission. And that includes General James Jones, Tom Donilon, and Susan Rice, who have all been NSAs to President Obama, members of the Trilateral Commission. You see, if you were a mathematician, you could not come up with a statistical figure on what the chances are of trilaterals filling all these positions in the last 40 years. You couldn't come up with a number that would be statistically understandable. It would have so many zeros after it, you need to go to the moon and back to calculate it. And yet, we have 350 million people in our country. Some of them are very bright people. And you think there's not, compared to the Trilateral Commission, which has only had, maybe 150 members from the United States at any one time, that small, narrow group of people are the only ones that are able to serve our nation in these capacities? I'm sorry. That is so incredulous that nobody would accept that kind of a statement. And yet, back in the early 1980s, when we debated members of the Trilateral Commission, that is Tony Sutton and myself, that's exactly what they said. We asked them this very question. And they said, well, President Carter, he was able to recognize talent when he saw it. And that's why he drew all these people from the Trilateral Commission and not from somewhere else. It's like, are you kidding me? You really could say that with it? I bet we didn't say that, but it's like I'm thinking it. How could you sit there with a straight face and try and convince me that the Trilateral Commission is superior to all of their men? Oh, wait a minute. We heard that from St. Simon.
When you were talking about that, I had found some. I can't find it now. I skipped around too much and I lost the page. But I found a quote from Carter. He said he had a meeting with 200 Trilateral Commission when he was president. And he said if this group would have been in existence after World War I, there wouldn't have been a World War II.
Yeah.
And I guess you can look at it like, wow, would be great. It'd be peace and wonderful, or would have been all locked up and locked away, so there wouldn't have been a war. But that's a pretty big statement.
Yes, it is.
And yet, when I remember driving around in the early 80s, listening to talk radio, and whenever somebody would call in with the Trilateral Commission, the CFR, any of these things, the guy would laugh him off the air, whether it be conservative, Rush Limbaugh, or Lassiter was a guy I listened to too. He was a liberal. They would just laugh these people off the air. And even to this day, there's a station in Chicago where they don't talk about politics. It's all just goofing off and stuff.
Yeah.
But even when that comes up, they just run them off the air. It's pretty funny. Well, it's not funny, actually, but...
Not ha-ha funny. Yeah. They've maintained this criticism of any critics since day one. I've seen it in various forms over the decades, and it is pretty sickening. But people believe it. Enough people believe it where it can suppress the message. Honestly, though, I'm fed up with that kind of mentality. We've got enough evidence right now that anybody that has a brain in their head can look at this evidence and see, like you said yourself at the beginning of the program, you look at this evidence and you get it. You can't come to any other conclusion. I didn't lead anybody to this conclusion. You lay out the evidence, it's like there's nothing else in the whole world that makes any sense. These people have done it to us. They've pulled off an economic coup right under our nose, got everybody to laugh the critics out of the whole arena, and they've conducted this plundering of America for 40 years. And now we can look back and connect the dots and see how they've done it. And you know what? They stand naked before the evidence. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but
their criticism is useless today. They stand naked before the evidence.
But who is hooting and hollering about it? I mean, you're not going to get it from any of the networks. You know. I mean, it's funny because to me, it's yeah. I've learned a lot about God by looking at Satan and going, okay, reversing those traits. Because God's pretty humble. When the same kind of thing goes here. If you want to know who are the real people ruling things, you look where the vacuum is. You don't hear about them, where no one talks about them. There's nothing, They may be hiding in plain sight. And they might have a nice fun wrapper. You can go to the Trilateral Commission webpage,
Yeah.
But it's when you see all the quiet. It's like a net behind the scenes.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Now, one more thing I guess I can get into here before we leave. I still, let me just go back to all these groups. Illuminati, we heard that a lot in the, what is Illuminati? Is Illuminati an example of somebody would be in this camp? I mean, because again, they're enlightened. They're the ones who know what it should be, and I'm smart and so forth.
There have been people who thought they were enlightened for a long time. I mean, they're dead. The ones in history are dead, but a lot of people felt they were more enlightened than other people. There was a movement. There was an organization called the Illuminati back in the late 1800s. But I'll tell you, I studied this for decades. And my co-author, Antony Sutton, passed in 2002. He studied this for a long, long time as well. And there is not a shred of demonstrable evidence that the organization of the Illuminati exists today. There just isn't. You can build a scenario to where you can, make a theory, if you will, that somebody exists that's pulling the strings. But you can't show me a picture. You can't get me a whistleblower. You can't produce the writings, at least the original research writings, to show that they're still in existence today. And basically, in my estimation, is just one big movement of misinformation and disinformation that would allow people to continue in this kind of I hate to use the word fringe, but in this kind of thinking. Because as long as people are looking at some mythical group called Illuminati or whatever it is, their eyes will never fall on the real enemy that's actually doing it to us. And so, I generally take exception with it. I'm not saying that there might be some people that wish they were still Illuminati around. And for all I know, there's somebody that's, resurrected the name and they're meeting, who knows, they might be meeting in Chicago, call themselves the Illuminati. I don't know. But I do know what the Trilateral Commission has done because they're in public, and everything that they have done is in writing. It is in their own hand. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the historical record. It's very clear. So at the very least, I would say, okay, let's take all the evidence that you have, not you personally, but you take, somebody that says, well, it's the Illuminati doing it, or the Rothschilds. Let's think, okay, look, you take all of the evidence that you have and line it out on the left side of the table here. I'll take all the evidence that I have and I'll line it out on the right side of the table. And let's just compare the evidence and see the quality of the evidence, the theme of the evidence, the pattern of the evidence, and let's just see who has a better case. And, I'm sorry, but, people that are really putting forward the Illuminati theory don't have a lot of hard evidence other than a historical record going back to the late 1800s.
Right. I mean, I guess what I've come up with is looking at this is it's almost like a descriptor of a particular frame of mind.
Yes.
You might be rich, for example. You might, there's kind of this, you can be described as that as opposed to a card-carrying meeting and,
And I have seen it. I have to say this. I've seen that actual used like that, where normally we would talk about they in the third party. Well, they did this and they did that, and they is the man. They is the establishment. They is whatever, and they could just as easily be called the Illuminati. So if something happens on a global basis that's not completely understandable, you can't really put a hook on it. It's the Illuminati that did. They're pulling the strings. They're the ones that do everything. It's either the Rothschilds or it's the Rockefellers or whatever. And they just kind of use that vague term to describe that system, that attitude, that that group of people that probably think they're superior to all other men.
And I would go back to, we mentioned these groups, Zionists, whatnot. I think all these groups are doing things. And there is an ideology that can put them together, if that might be ideology and or ethnicity or what have you. There are doing things. You can point to things that happened that was done by somebody who fits under that term. Yep. I guess what I never saw to before until now, after dealing with what you've written, is I still haven't saw how there was nobody who was superior. They all have their agendas and they fight and they do this and that. And, they're using this one for that one. But when you brought out your structure of the Trilateral Commission, that just fits right on over it. And all the things that are going on in the world are, it's got feet to it. It's got hands to it. You can feel it, touch it. You can look at it. There's the statistics,
That's right. That's exactly right. You remember in Europe in 2011 when Greece was melting down and Italy was melting down? Those two countries are the foundation of Western civilization. It's kind of ironic that they're the first ones to melt down. The European Union nobody asked them to do this, but they sent in two people to become prime ministers of those countries, which is astounding because they weren't elected. They just said, let me introduce you to your new prime minister. You remember when Greece and Italy almost melted down in 2011, a huge financial crisis in Greece especially. Cars are getting burned, looting. It's just a horrible situation. And the European Union sent in prime ministers for those countries. They were not elected. They basically said, let us introduce you to your new prime minister. How they could really talk those countries into accepting a prime minister that wasn't elected, I can't figure, because these two countries are the cradle of Western civilization, for Pete's sake. But they did. And so Lucas Papademos went to Greece, and guess what? He was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Also, guess what? In the press, they called him a technocrat. The EU said, we're sending in a technocrat to take over, to be the PM of your country, to help you straighten out your economic, chaos. And in Italy, they sent in a guy by the name of Mario Monti. Monti was the chairman of the European division of the Trilateral Commission. Guess what they called him? A technocrat. They called them both technocrats. Unelected, appointed out of thin air from the European Commission, and for all of the tens of millions of people that might be qualified to take those positions and do something in those countries, isn't it strange that the EU was somehow just directed to pick two members of the Trilateral Commission and send them in instead and call them technocrats on the way in?
Because, there's not 100,000 members of this.
No,
it's a small amount, especially if you put it out even if you put it into the academic political world, it's a small amount.
It is. Absolutely. I did a little calculation on Obama. figuring out how many members of the Trilateral Commission that are available for public service and that are on the left side of the aisle. Like they lean more towards a Democrat side. And I went through every one of the U.S. members and checked them off. Like if you're the head of GE or something, you're not going to be taking a cabinet position. You're rich, you're doing your own thing. So I boiled the pool down, and I figured, then looked at the people from the commission that Obama had actually dealt with, and I figured that Obama dealt with about 90% of that core that could be, he could grab that were left-leaning, members of the Trilateral Commission. Of those available, he had about 90% of them in his government at one time or another so far, and we're not done.
Wow. 90% of the available pool, because you can't have somebody in the cabinet, I guess, from Japan.
Well, he's not going to appoint Dick Cheney to be Secretary of Defense, right? Right.
For the obvious, of course, I did notice that when he took office, one of the things that really, if it didn't wake people up that there's a team going on here, left and right is on the same team, is that a lot of for the first time I can remember anyway, a lot of the people who were with Bush stayed on in the beginning with him. I mean, they stayed on. I was like, what? And the first time I noticed that was when you had the Federal Reserve chairman. Mm-hmm. He went switched from Democrat to Republican and stayed on. It was like that should have been a big thing there too.
Yeah.
What about the Federal Reserve?
Alan Greenspan, I have to add, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. So was Paul Volcker before him. They had a long run with the Federal Reserve at their fingertips.
Well, I probably want to segue into this to get toward the end of this, is this whole transhumanism, the idea of the technocracy. And I've been reading a novel, listening, I should say, while I drive, Peter F. Hamilton. He has several of, they're written from like a British perspective of government in the future. And one of the principles of all these books is that you can basically live forever. You can rejuvenate your body, and eventually, in the novels, they advance to where you can actually download yourself into a computer and live forever. And you think, oh, that's a fantasy novel, and that's crazy. But then we go to 2045.com, which talks, actually has, I have it up on the webpage here for people to see. They actually have a timeline for becoming immortal. Mm-hmm. Immortal being living in a computer, however you want to describe that machine. But they have 2015 to 2020 in that time frame, which, by the way, it's 2015. Mm-hmm. A robotic copy of a human being remotely controlled via BCI. And the best way to describe it is if you saw that movie with Bruce Willis in it. Of course, I'm not going to be able to say the name now. I should have wrote this down. Surrogate, where they would actually put on and actually live life through these robots. Mm-hmm. This is what I've read is from 2020 to 2025, an avatar, which is a human brain, is transplanted at the end of one's life. So you are actually, you die, but then you take your human brain out and put it into a robot or a computer of some type. 2030 to 2035, an artificial brain in which the human personality is transferred at the end of one's life. And then 2040, 2045, a hologram-like avatar. Mm-hmm. And these people believe that you'll be able to download your consciousness into this situation and live forever. And they're totally serious. I mean, it's just totally serious.
Yeah. They really are.
And it's scary because it's like, my question is, as a rational thinking human being, is like, how do you know that everything that you are is in your brain? And secondly, you don't even know how it's stored in the brain. Mm-hmm. How are you going to be able to translate that into, I mean, it's like, it's so ridiculous, and yet these guys are serious. And for $1 million, you can get in on the ground floor of this and reserve a spot. More will come but for $1 million, you're in the door, and you're first in line or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's beyond, I don't know. I don't even know how to say that.
Yeah. And it is a very serious movement. And, applying science to the condition of man is something that swept the university world all over the world. And you have at every larger institution, like in our state, we have the University of Arizona and Arizona State here locally in Phoenix. They have been combining four different science departments into one. It's called Converging Technologies. The acronym is NBIC. That stands for nanotechnology, biotechnology, information sciences, and cognitive science. That's the science of the mind. These four areas of these four disciplines are being combined into one because they're all related to the digital world, for one thing. And secondly, they believe that that these four disciplines will be able to spring mankind into this transcendent state where man will be able to escape death. He'll be omniscient. He'll be omnipresent. Basically, having all the qualities of God, you see. Now, just in retrospect, I want to point out that ever since Adam, man has had a problem wanting to become like God. That's been a problem with mankind in general, no matter how you look at it in history. It's a metaphysical proposition, if nothing else, that man can somehow escape his human condition and become like God. He can transcend himself to become like God. This is a metaphysical belief that even before science and technology existed as we know it today, was very strong. And so, some religions got founded on that very principle, that you could transcend yourself if you just do certain things. Now that science has come along and offered a little bit more anecdotal evidence that this can actually be done, when these metaphysical beliefs got crossed with science, it's like, oh my gosh, the transcendentalist, if you will, thought, wow, we can use science to achieve the holy grail of immortality. And so they began to look at science only in terms of providing that escape route to immortality. So they're focusing all these different little doctrines and these little, things, whatever. This is how we're going to do it. But you already have just debunked pretty much their whole theory. How can you prove that the essence of man is in his brain? You can't. Is the answer. You can't. Is a man's soul only what is contained in his brain? And will you ever know how the brain really processes knowledge and all the things that the amazing brain does? Yet, you see President Obama in his last inaugural speech, one little subsection, he gave this proclamation that he's going to start a new scientific endeavor comparable in nature to the mapping of the human genome, to map the human brain. He said he's going to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at this to universities in America, and other nations and countries are doing the same thing. So the races used to be the space race in the 80s and 90s. Today it's the space race on what's between your ears. And so now they're all rushing to see, can we map the brain and figure out how the brain works? I got some bad news for them in the end. I think, personally, they're playing with fire.
Consider this. This is outrageous, but say they're able to download someone's consciousness into a computer. I mean, it's so outrageous, but let's just give them that. All right. Say they got that worked out. How do you know that's them in there? I mean, is there going to be some kind of a certificate that you have of authenticity?
A fingerprint, an iris scan.
So even if they achieve their goal, yeah. I always picture this in my head as somebody going to be downloaded on a computer, which will destroy you, So as they come out the other end, now they're dead. And they're like, whoops, and it's too late then. So I don't know. I'm not making fun. I'm just amazed at how somebody will say, well, you can't prove there's a God, all right? But they'll believe this, which I think there's a little more evidence in God, based on the way the uniqueness of things and the history of the world, and there's a God like in every, be it a demon or a God of goodness, whatever. Throughout all of human history, there's been that.
Yeah.
Well, now they've come up with science and they're saying that, well, we've explained God. Look at the CERN with the God particle. Mm-hmm. You know, it reminds me of a joke I heard where science was getting together with God, and they're going to create man, right? So God takes Earth in his hand, creates, blows in, and creates Adam. And science says, okay, it's my part. And the scientist goes, grabs the Earth, and God goes, get your own Earth. and to me, that's an example of this to realize how ridiculous it is. So I don't know how the Trilateral Commission in public, how much they're going to embrace transhumanism in a public sense, because it could get people to go, wait a minute. So it might be the dirty little secret or the little backdoor thing that they have, because certain people will follow their way because of this. So they'll, accept that.
Yeah. Well, you have, for instance, Ray Kurzweil, the leading proponent of the singularity concept, is now the chief scientist at Google. And the chairman of Google, and by the way, Kurzweil doesn't need a job. It's not that he needed money. He doesn't. But he took the job based on he gets all of the combined resources of Google at his beck and call to further his theory of the singularity and transcending, into immortality. But the chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, is a recent inductee into the Trilateral Commission.
Well, there you go. I mean, it would make sense.
They're in it. Yeah, they love that stuff.
Because the idea of the technocracy is to have all the information. Well, see, now, after hearing your stuff, I understand all about the smart meters and all that. I mean, I've heard it before. I mean, Alex Jones goes on about technocracy, but for some reason, be it my fault or his or whatever, it didn't click. When I got your stuff, I was like, that's why the smart meter. They need to know all about you. They need that at Facebook. All that is about data mining. That's priceless. And you think, well, why? What do they care? Just to be able to put an ad on my email, which I think it's a good idea to be able to target an ad. I got nothing wrong with that. It's a nice concept, But now it makes sense because they're putting in the infrastructure to be able to. If you have cable TV, they know what you're watching. Well, why? Because cable, anything digital has to talk back. Analog didn't. Why do we have to get rid of analog TV? No talk back. Yeah. So now analog radios are going. Right. It's all about that talk back and that information.
Yeah. This would be a good time probably to read the first 5 requirements of technocracy that were recorded on page 232 of the original Technocracy study course written by Scott and Howard back in 1934. It's a mind blower. Requirement number 1 is, quote, register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. Number 2, quote, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. 3, provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption. Number 4, quote, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services where produced and where used. And number 5, quote, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual, close quote. There you go.
Yeah.
That's the requirement for smart grid today with the smart meters. That's all they talk about is balanced load. You see it all over utilities propaganda. And then the Total Awareness Society, where every bit of our data is being sucked up. Everything is being sucked up and put into the master database, if you will, like organizations like the like the NSA, but others as well, not just the NSA. So the whole lot of them. They're sucking up all this data because technocrats need to have data as a monitoring device in order to be able to engineer society correctly. And it's lucky for us that even though the technology for collecting data is there, massive databases, massive network of stuff sucking up data from all over the place, they can collect it like crazy, and they are, and they're storing it up, from phone calls to emails to financial records, biometric information, you name it. They're sucking it all up. What they don't have yet is the technology and the computers and the artificial intelligence type programs to analyze the data and tell them what it means. Mm-hmm. We're about 2 to 3 years away from that right now, James. I say that my background is in computer information science, and I understand these things. I'm not substantive with it, but I understand it. They're about maybe 3 to 5 years at most away from having the advanced technology to analyze this vast store of data to tell them what it means. And when they start deducing what it means, that's when we're going to see the bite of technocracy come into us. That's when we're going to start to see the predictive type of technology that tells us in advance what we can or can't do based on the probabilities of this, that, and the other. In fact, just in Florida, just a month or two ago, they announced that some, I don't know if statewide or in a local community, but they're actually implementing a pre-crime algorithm to analyze data to figure out when crimes are, most likely to be happening. I don't know if you remember the movie Minority Report.
Oh yeah,
from the early 2000s. That's exactly what it is. It's just it's witch doctor stuff. It's really what it is.
Yeah, they're already starting to look at this when they're starting to look at who's going to be fighting this. They're analyzing having returning vets because they're able to not only fight but survive.
Right.
Gun owners, that kind of mentality where I have my own, or preppers and all these things. And of course, you notice all these terms are being vilified in the media.
Yes.
So it's almost like, would I ever thought that I'd be looking for the good old days of Hearst? You know?
I know. Yeah, you're right.
Because at least then, I mean, sure, he had his problems, but if he didn't like what was going on, it was blasted out there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know. Well, I tell you, in closing, could you leave us with some thoughts, maybe something I didn't bring up that you wanted to mention or what have you?
The main thing is, at this point, people need to act local. Not, the national scene right now is out of our reach by and large, except for just maybe very limited things. But people need to turn inward to their own communities and drive this thinking out, whether it be city planners, the city council, board of supervisors in your county, planning and zoning, water boards, fire boards, wherever you find a group of people that can implement sustainable development policies. You need to get in and get your hands on them, so to speak, not physically, but get your hands on them, face them, and try and talk them, persuade them out of this if they're just ignorant, and if they're not, tell them to get the heck out of your community. Just go find someplace else to live. Maybe they go to China or something, but go somewhere else and practice your technocratic nonsense. But we don't want it here. And many communities are actually having success at this right now. You're not going to see it in the national news, but they are having some success. And I think this is what, at this point, this is really the only thing that people can do. Work in their local community. And when you're done with that, when you're done with your city, go to your county. When you're done with your county, go to the state and send a message up the food chain to all the other people at the top of it that when we're done down here, we're coming for you. And don't think that you're going to escape. You're not going to get a free pass.
It would have to be done in a local sense because look at the national reach that they have.
Yes,
now,
they do. They really do. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. The Jade Helm military exercise is going to be taking place very soon. Americans in those states, and I think Americans from other states ought to travel to those states and get involved in mass protests against Jade Helm. Take to the streets, get signs, dog them, follow them everywhere, get the media on you protesting them doing what they're doing in our communities. They have no business being there. That's just an example. Thinking locally. They don't belong there. Run them out. If you can't run them out, at least put a spotlight on them.
It's interesting what parts of the country are going to be doing this. It seems that it's not like New York, any of those, because they're already kind of in the bag the way they have things running there. I got a map of the proposed areas. I've noticed that where the town I'm in is pretty good. It doesn't mean they won't get involved in that, but they seem to be the police actually serve the people and whatnot. So far, but I'm very close to Chicago, and it's not. Rahm Emanuel, he's right. I'm waiting for you to tell me he's a Trilateral Commission guy.
He's not.
Oh,
he probably wishes he was.
Oh, you know what? That is one thing. The CFR, I mean, if you can kind of give me a compare and contrast, is that it was one a subset of the other? I mean, what is the relationship between those two?
Well, the CFR is strictly North American, mostly from the United States. They have Canadian members and some Mexican members as well, but it's not an international organization at all. It's a North American phenomena. And they're very broad in their membership. They have over 3,500 members. You submit an application to join. You could submit. I mean, they may say no, but they may say yes. But the CFR is supposed to elect its own board of directors from its diverse membership, from 3,500 people. They vote, and they supposedly have a uniform directorship across the whole membership, of the people, by the people, and for the people sort of thing. But when you look at it a little more closely, you see that 40% of the board, actually, I think it's more about 44%, are members of the Trilateral Commission.
Mm.
And the president of the CFR is also a member of the Trilateral Commission. Mm. What do you make of that? Well, you see that, the tail and the dog here. The CFR has been subsumed, if you will, by the Trilateral Commission, and they're calling the shots. So they have used the CFR to produce studies, to produce papers and books and booklets and whatever to support the Trilateral Commission policy, not the other way around.
Mm.
Not the other way around.
There had to be a relationship, and it makes sense, because as I was looking at the lists for people in government, you have a lot of CFR, Trilateral Commission, you got the double stamp there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of CFRs without them, and there's Trilateral Commission, but it makes sense that would be some type of a group that they have co-opted. Probably didn't take too much work. There might not be a whole lot of difference between them all, but...
Yeah, well, they pay for studies to be done, and, they say it's a nonpartisan, unbiased study. But the fact of the matter is, whoever pays for it gets what they ask for.
Yeah.
What they want.
Which is funny why the FDA will actually pass a drug being okay based on the studies ran by the company who makes the drug.
I know.
They wouldn't let me do that if I wanted to,
No, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it.
No, okay. Well, on the aspect of the churches, I wanted to say one thing. I was at my daughter's church, and the pastor, to my amazement, gave a sermon on how we should look to government in times of trouble and all that. And I was just, I heard this. You hear it, but then I'm hearing him. I couldn't help it. I went up to talk with him, and I said, "What are you doing? I mean, don't you want to have God and Christ be the example of what to do, not what the government is telling you?" And he was just flabbergasted. He didn't even answer. He was like, I guess the fact that I actually said that.
Wow.
He didn't, no one else. They're all smiling and going along with it, and so on.
Yeah.
So, but I tell you, I want to thank you. It's been a couple hours here. I appreciate you. I got to be able to ask the questions on the other interview, and go a little further in some areas. And it's one of those things that is so important that I almost don't want to. It's one of those things like, okay, this should be a subset now of everything what we all do. And look on this, because that's how important it is. I don't know if there's a way out of it. Frankly, I'm kind of hoping for some divine intervention to help break the backs, because unless the people rise pretty soon, but
you're right.
But locally is the answer, and that's good. So.
Yeah. The time is now. You're right about that. The time is now.
Well,
not 6 months now.
I'm now seeing I'm saying technocracy. Help me. I'm thinking technocracy. I have dyslexia, so I get locked into that. I was like, what? Technocracyrising.com is the way to get to that website. Of course, your other one, August Forecast Review.
Yeah, augustforecast.com. Augustforecast.com. And the book is available on Amazon as well. It's available as a Kindle version, as you know. And we just have a fairly competitive price on technocracyrising.com. But I'll also sign all my books. If people buy a book from technocracyrising.com, I have the ability to sign the book and send it to them, and I'm happy to do that. just my little touch. Take it and go do something really good with it.
Yeah, it always helps to buy from the author anyway, because
it helps. It helps us out.
It does.
We get a little bit more money if I sell it ourselves. So,
all righty. Well, again, I appreciate for the time. God bless and what you're doing.
Great. Thank you.
And take care.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.